and welcome to our live stream on this Wednesday in the turbulence of the Canadian Grand Prix, that amazing race we had on the circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal last Sunday, clashing as it did with the Indianapolis 500. Fabulous win for, if you haven't seen it yet, you need to see the last 10 laps. Fabulous win for my mate Felix Rosenqvist. Really, really pleased for him after all these years of making it in Formula 3 in a way that you would imagine would take him all the way to Formula 1. But the Formula 1 team showed no interest in him, so Felix went over to America, and now he's won the Indy 500. It's been a long, hard slog, but brilliant for him. So happy for Felix there. Yeah, what a weekend. Kimi Antonelli. Who would have thought? Would George Russell ever have imagined that it would come down to this? And now we go to Monaco, where I just, as I keep saying, I cannot imagine Kimi Antonelli is going to be slow around that. Amazing. What else? Yeah, should mention Nirei Fukuzumi again, who won at Suzuka for his first win since 21. First win for the single car entry rookie team, as it's called, owned by Morizo, the chairman of Toyota. And what does that say about the potential maybe for Nirei to get to where he belongs as well, in my opinion, which is somewhat closer to Formula 1 than he is at the moment. He was really good in Formula 3, teammate to George Russell and Jack Aitken at ART, and he's still very close to George. He wouldn't have been too happy with what happened in Canada, I don't think, but George would have been very happy for Nirei, and what a win. And you can see there he's alongside Ayumu Iwasa, who's very good nearest to us, and Kakanushin Ota, who's also very, very quick in Super Formula, and he beat them both. They all three crossed the line, separated by less than a second at Suzuka. So fabulous win. Sasha Fenestraz winning the previous day. A different sort of win because it was semi-wet, semi-dry, pit stops at the back of the grid. He started somewhere near the back and made the pit stop at the right time, that sort of thing. But yeah, good stuff going on in Super Formula as ever. And before we go too much further, we've had quite a lot of comments about potential, the rumours of BYD coming into Formula 1, maybe even with Christian Horner. And I've been thinking, why? What? I mean, do they know something about Formula 1's future that we don't know, that it's going all electric or something horrendous? And then, of course, the penny dropped when yesterday Ferrari launched, to great fanfare, their latest road car. Look at this. Can you believe that? I mean, if you think about Bertone, Ital Design, Pininfarina, you think about all the wonderful Italian coach builders, and they've got two ex-Apple guys to design the coach work for them and accepted and approved the design, what's more. I mean, that to me, if BYD are looking at that, they're saying, well, Ferrari are building cars just like ours now, so we can build a Formula 1 car like their Formula 1 car. I assume that's what's going on. I mean, obviously I'm being slightly cynical there, but and to give it its credit, that car is all electric. It's active ride, it's four-wheel steering. It's also 640,000 euros, which is a lot of money, I think, for that car. And it's also unbelievably heavy. I mean, that's the other thing. If Ferrari were doing a car, which they want to call Luce, which is the Italian word for lights, as in lights, not lightweight, but nonetheless, it's definitely going to be punned in the English language. You'd think that Ferrari would be the first company to come out and do a really nice lightweight electric car, but this thing's 2,200 kilos or something. So presumably the heaviest Ferrari that's ever been built, I would imagine. So just take a look at that again. This is a new Ferrari road car. That's your $640,000 or euros, pounds. They're all about the same now, I think. Look at that. I mean, to me, that just looks like any normal electric car on the road now. Nothing there says Ferrari. So, yeah, that explains BYD sniffing around Formula 1, doesn't it? Okay. So we'll get into some questions because there's so much to talk about post-Canada, so many topics. Had a good session with Cameron on Monday about it all, but I'm sure you guys have got lots of comments as well. So let's get straight into it now. with I'm going to try and prioritize members. Obviously, it's not that easy the way the chat box thing works. But anyway, thank you very much for this one. Starting off with Sarosh, who's one of our very loyal members and viewers. Peter, Charles Leclerc said on Friday that the car just was going straight on the brakes and wasn't turning in. I actually thought that he would have understood the problems and be better than Hamilton in the race. Yeah, well, what he's describing there is no tire temperature basically, and that's what he suffered from all weekend. Not the only driver to suffer from that. I would say probably Pierre Gasly, probably Oliver Behrman, probably Oscar Piastri to some extent relative to Lando. So there's definitely a bit of a common factor developing if you look at quick drivers who historically or recently have been pretty good alongside their teammates, suddenly getting blown away by their teammates. That's 4 good examples. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Charles has no idea what's going on. And let's add to that, Canada, Isaac Hadjar was very, very quick, wasn't he? He wasn't that far away from Max. When really came down to it in the race, all the rest of it, Max was just truly brilliant as ever. But, Isaac was there or thereabouts. Anyway, so what is all that? I mean, Canada, you could take it in isolation and say Canada was really weird. It was quite cold. Pirelli did bring the softness of the range, but it wasn't enough, particularly on the mediums. And Charles, of course, had to qualify and race on the mediums in the sprint race, apart from, on the last SQ3. But why? Lewis maybe throwing the car about a bit more, gets a bit more tire temperature into the car. That was the old sort of adage that a driver who's a little bit wider corner entries and gets on the power a bit sooner and he's agitating the rear a bit more is always going to have more temperature on a day when it's difficult to get temperature. So let's just look back through that group again that I just mentioned. Maybe that would account for the difference between Lewis and Charles at Ferrari, maybe. Would it account for the difference between Gasly and Colapinto? Probably, because Colapinto does have very wide entries, doesn't he? Very wide entries, and he moves the car around more, energizes the car more than Pierre Gasly would, who drives more on the front. So there's another example of it. Let's look at Oscar Piastri against Lando. I've often said that Oscar does have this capability of turning in a little bit earlier, feeling more the front of the car, whereas Lando typically seems to drive feeling for the rear of the car the most. And his corners are a little bit longer than Oscar's. Not in all cases, but generally when Oscar's on it, he's shortening the corner a little bit more than Lando, as I've always said. So there's another example. The only odd one out there really for me is Oliver Behrman, assuming we're prepared to concede that he is not looking quite as good alongside Ocon as he did last year, for example. And maybe it's early days for that. But Oliver is definitely sort of Colapinto-esque in the way he drives, long corners, wide entries, but very, very good. So that's a bit of an anomaly for me. But because it's a Haas, you never really know what they're playing around with, how equal the cars are, etc. Because midfield, maybe things are not quite the same. So maybe it is just that. In Canada, it's that, I suspect. And if you right at the front of the grid, if you've got Mercedes, you've got George against Kimi, it's a slightly different thing because the car quantifiably has more efficient downforce and they seem to do a better job harvesting the power than anybody else as well. So when you've got a car that is very, very good relative to all the opposition, it's a slightly different situation. But then Kimi, although Kimi is shorter corners and Kimi would have been energizing the car less than George, he did still get unbelievable tire temperature, but that's probably because the Mercedes overall, compared with everybody else, particularly compared with the Ferrari, is generating more downforce. More downforce than a McLaren, probably, not by much, but a little bit more. So I think that's what's going on there. And you could say, yeah, you'd think he would get it right in the race, but what's he going to do in the race? He's just going to drive the Charles Leclerc race and be what he is. He's not going to start driving like Lewis Hamilton. As good as that would have been for that weekend, he's not going to start doing that, is he? So anyway, good question, Sarosh. Thank you. Mariano Rodriguez, very nice name. Hi, Peter. Charles said that he just had zero feeling in the car. He praised Lewis and said he'd look into his data. How much can he learn from Lewis's data where he struggles track specific? Well, I think I've kind of come to the conclusion, talking to myself there, arguing with myself, that it probably was track and weather specific in Canada for that. Although, of course, one has to bring into the, inevitably have to bring in the complications of the 2026 Formula One cars anyway, and how to drive them, how to get the best from them, and how reliant the drivers are on the engineer talking to them on the radio about what specific strat to run, when to put it on, just before the braking area, whatever it is. And those things are obviously distracting if you've also got other problems as a driver that you're trying to solve. So there's more going on around the car than ever before, or in the car really. And I thought it was quite interesting. I mean, it's not the first time he's done it, obviously, but it's quite interesting that Charles basically last third of the race said, look, I don't want to talk on the radio anymore. I just let me focus on my driving. And I thought, it didn't really result in much, although he brought the car home, but he was basically slower every lap. From lap 50, including the spin, Charles was slower than, apart from one lap, I think, was slower than Lewis by quite a long margin. And he said, I think, after, oh, well, don't read too much of that. I was just trying to bring the car home. Fair enough. But so let's go back to the comment, I don't want to talk anymore on the radio. I think that's quite an interesting point, because I think in 26, the teams and the drivers have become more and more, there's more and more chat going on between them, and there's more and more stuff that the drivers need to do than ever before in the history of Formula One. And if you are a seat of the pants driver who loves the feel of the car, and you're a bit bored by all that, and you just want to get on with it, and you're not really a sim driver, then you're going to have found that very irritating and maybe distracting to what you're trying to achieve. And I think Lewis has done a very, very good job, as far as I can make out, in saying, I don't want to go near the simulator. I don't want to, excuse me one second, I'm just trying to wake up Dexter, get him to go and have his breakfast. Come on, Dexter, come on. Breakfast, lunchy, come on. Go on, go on, go on, good boy. Good boy. Okay. He had a long walk this morning, so he's fast asleep. In Lewis's case, I just want to feel the car again. And he did a really good job of doing that. And maybe he did that after Miami, I don't know. But it's just like, I don't want to know about all that stuff. There's too much going on. Let me just be a racing driver again. And he did. And he just drove like Lewis Hamilton. And it happened to be on a weekend when, if you drove like that, the tires and the ambient and the track temperature all worked well for you. And that's what I think happened there. And it raises the question, however, in my mind, about whether or not we should, I mean, given how complicated these cars are, whether we should have radio at all. Do we really need it? Let's simplify it. Max is always going on, and I think he's quite correct to do so, about, getting back to brass elements of what Formula One is all about. Let's have the radio for Friday and Saturday when you want to do all the setting up, but a bit like the sprint race, when you go into the Parc Fermé, you couldn't touch the car. Let's go into Sunday with sort of race steering wheel with far fewer buttons on it and no radio and pit signals only. And the drivers have to do a lot more in the car. And I think you'll find then that guys like Leclerc will immediately, and probably Piastri, well, all of them, Gasly, Berman, well, all of them would benefit from that, I would predict. And what would you need to still have on the steering wheel? You'd need to have speed limiter, I guess. You could have brake balance, diff, engine braking. That's about it. What else would you need? What do you actually need is an absolute necessity on the steering wheel. In the race, obviously back markers are an issue and you don't want to be impeding, but it's not an issue as it is on Friday and Saturday when everybody's mixed out on the circuit. Everybody's in some sort of order. And anyway, you've got flag marshals and lights in the cockpit. So, and don't forget, the flag marshal actually takes precedence over the lights, because the lights can fail, whereas in theory the human being won't. So you still got your flag marshals, you've got your pit signals. Oh, but what about stacked pit stops, when to come in, strategy? Yeah, well, okay, you got your pit signals, and let the drivers start making decisions. How many times have we heard Lewis Hamilton when he's been told to come in, say, well, the tyres feel great. Why are we bringing me in now? Let the driver drive the car. It's his office. It's his operational area, and let him do that. That's. I think the fans would love that. Yeah, of course, some of the radio expletive deletives, they would miss some of that. But is that a bad thing, really? I don't think it is. And I think it would be much better to be completely as pure as you can make it in the cockpit and the racing with the pit wall. And then, of course, you get to the thing about, the absurd decision by McLaren to put them on intermediates at the start of the dry Canadian Grand Prix on the basis of a weather forecast that everybody else was looking at as well. And anyway, not wanting to take any sort of gamble with either driver. Oh, it might rain. We better put them on intermediates. I mean, what's that all about? And I tell you what, one thing it is all about. It's about somebody like Piastri not wanting to be wrong alongside his teammate. You're thinking too much about the teammates now. And that's why I keep saying it. If you don't have a team where the driver can just focus on his own job, then you're in trouble. And I would be willing to bet that one of the reasons Oscar was on intermediates was because Lando was going to be on intermediates, or vice versa. We've got to put them both on. Whatever you do, we've got to be both of them. Well, that's rubbish for a start. And secondly, the choice of tyres in that situation should always be, in my opinion, 100% up to the driver. He's the guy in the car. He's controlling his office for the day. And to have some sort of committee tell the driver or recommend to the driver in a political way that he can't really say no to it, that he's got to start on intermediates, is completely and utter. It's when it's got completely out of control. And the driver's basically lost his feel for what he's doing as a racing driver. And I know a guy like Oscar's I think he's had a sports psychologist from the start of his career. She's probably brilliant. But there are spare elements of motor racing where sometimes you have to strip it all down and say, look, get a life. What are you guys doing? Get out there on slicks. Even if everybody else on intermediates, it would have been the right call, because these are two world-class racing drivers. They should be able to drive on slicks in the semi-wet for 2 laps if it's going to dry out in 5. That's what it's all about. And anyway, getting back to the point, I think the driver without the radio, actually, it would be brilliant. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see pit signals coming into it much more. And I'd like to see drivers choosing when they want to come into the pits as well. Come in, do a countdown. Oh, he's coming in now, quick, mayhem. Yeah, good. And the driver knows that he might lose a bit of time if it's a stacked pit stop, but if he wants to come in, then let him do it. Ralph, Montoya, French Grand Prix, Williams. I think that's where we should go. I think it's what we should be doing. That's my view anyway. Sarosh again. Peter, how would you compare Senna and Prost on gear shifting? Many people talk about Senna's, rightfully so, but Prost on the onboards is so smooth, no load on the car at all. Yeah, we're talking about when they had the manual shifts, because both of them, of course, evolved into paddle shifts. But when they had the manual shifts and they had to change gear with the clutch on the left, well, they didn't use it that much, actually. They certainly didn't use it on upshifts, maybe from neutral into the next gear, but certainly, third to neutral and then neutral to fourth, you'd maybe dip the clutch a bit, but they were pretty quick, pretty smooth. I've got no real memories of Prost's gear changing, to be honest. And it never struck me as being as good as Michele Alboreto or Carlos Reutemann. But he was never bad. He was always smooth and nice and perfect coordination. And of course Senna, but he did do he would go from fifth to third if he was braking for a hairpin, or third to first, or whatever it was, whereas Senna never would. That was the only real difference that I remember feeling about the two of them at the time. Thanks. Good question. Another one from Sarosh. Being a huge Leclerc and Verstappen fan, any suggestions on what Leclerc can learn from Verstappen? Great thing about Leclerc is that he's very self-critical, says to be looking at Hamilton's data. Yeah, well, in a way, I think that is the difference between Max and Charles. I mean, let's face it, Charles is a cool cat, isn't he? He's a cool guy. He's a very well-balanced human being. And he's very, very charming. And I think in a way he's a victim of that. Not that those are bad qualities at all, but I'm talking about now as a Formula One driver. I think he is that. Whereas Max doesn't give a stuff, does he? He doesn't give a stuff what people think of him. He doesn't care about projecting any sort of image or having to project an image. All he wants to do is simplify his racing down to the barest bones and get out there and drive that race car. Yes, he gets emotional, but he gets emotional at the right things at the right time. And I think the difference is exactly what you've just described, Sir Ross. When after that race, I would have thought the last thing Leclerc would want to do is start looking at Hamilton's data, or indeed being nice about it and saying, well, I couldn't really get the tyres to work at all. I mean, he says it in a very pleasant way. If you look at the interview, he's almost smiling. And, it shouldn't be that. It should be the car was atrocious. I couldn't get the best from it. This is a joke, and walk off. That's what Max would say, basically. And I think that's much better. Just draw a line and then get on with Monaco. I don't want to talk about it. And I think that's the mistake he makes. Because I can't imagine if Max had that race alongside Hadjar, that he would be saying, oh, I've got to go and look at Isaac's telemetry. He would just think, something's wrong with my car or me or whatever. I need to get on top of it. I don't need the Isaac's telemetry to tell me what that is. And I think that's the problem with Charles. He's too all-embracing in the way he thinks and operates, because he's such a well-balanced person. And I think beyond that, he's also very emotional. And when the car isn't doing what he wants it to do, he gets emotional about it in the race. And it doesn't manifest itself just in going off and making mistakes, or they did, of course, have that spin. It also manifests itself in not getting the best from himself, because he becomes stressed and quite tense about the whole thing instead of saying relax. Now, when Max is in that situation, the car's not handling well, he might have a bit of a rant with GP, and it'll last a lap or two, but you can see from his body language that he's immediately said to himself, okay, settle down, just whatever this car is now, I'm going to drive it at its absolute best, and I'm going to be nice and soft with everything I do. And that's because he doesn't have any clutter in his mind or his brain. And to me, Max is evolving alongside, when you see what's happening with guys like Charles at the moment, Max is evolving over a period of time into probably the best balanced racing driver of all time, if you take into account his natural talent as well, and his ability to channel things the right way and to react the right way, and not to cover himself with crud that comes with fame, fortune, being paid a lot of money. And a lot of drivers out there, and it would be inappropriate to mention them because it'd just be inappropriate, I think suffer from being paid too much money and having to live up to an image that actually doesn't help them when it gets into driving the racing car. And I think that's the problem. And Max, to his credit, has never allowed that to happen and never will. He's just not interested in it. And going back a million years, I think Jim Clark had the same attitude. That's why Jim Clark was able to drive a Formula 2 car at Crystal Palace very, very well, having just won the Indy 500 4 days before. And he's doing it as about to win his second world championship in Formula 1 as well, because all that fame and stuff didn't mean anything to him. Nothing. He just wanted to drive the next race, get into the next car. That's why Max did Nürburgring. Can you imagine Charles doing what Max did at the Nürburgring? That's the difference. It's not really the Charles Leclerc thing, is it? You do it within the Ferrari family or whatever, and Monaco's a great place to be. And I'm not criticizing Charles. I'm a massive Charles fan, always have been. I love the way he drives. I'm just describing the way he is, though. And it's, it just is. And if the car's good, the team's going well, he'll get 100% from it. But he is an emotional guy in the car. Max isn't. He just gets angry sometimes. Speaking of which, I was quite impressed at how angry George got, actually, when the whole thing stopped. It was good to see. It's good to see George doing that. And I know some people may say, oh, what a hypocrite. He's always moaning about Max losing his cool. Now look at George. Well, it's slightly different, though. I mean, I think what George is complaining about is Max T-boning him because he's annoyed, rather than just throwing his headrest out of the car when it's pulled up by the side of the track. Cheers, by the way. So anyway, lots to talk about there, isn't there? I just think racing drivers have become in general, it's very easy to say it, but in general, they're victim of their own image and their own earning power, and it's very difficult to become just a bare bones racing driver in the midst of all that. But if you want a template of how to do it, look at Max Verstappen. And when you say, what will Leclerc be looking at from Hamilton's data, he'd be much better off learning from Max Verstappen's approach. And that's not easy for him, but it would involve, in my opinion, it would involve a lot less social media, usual things, stripping himself down bare to the garage and not looking at Lewis's data, contrary to what he says, and just getting in the car and feeling the car. It's what Lewis did in Canada. He just got in. I don't want the sim. I just get into the car and drive it. That he can learn that from Lewis. That would be a good thing. Savage Douglas says, Mr. Peter, I was finally able to see Kimi turning in slightly earlier and a little bit smoother than George in Canada, especially 8 and 9. As you said, beautiful to watch and also breathtaking. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. And and I think it was an example of how, when I talk about short corners, it isn't just short corners, as I've often said. It's the makeup of the driver that enables him to create short corners when it can be beneficial to him. But the other thing Canada showed to me is how Kimi, a little bit like Alonso actually, Kimi is so good at having the car square on the road whenever possible, and he's using the tires beautifully in that respect, whereas George always has an edge, and it's all where Kimi's flat but he's still got lateral G. George has got an edge to it. And that was the difference. And again, you could say, because of the cold ambience and all the rest of it, that Kimi was able to sit much closer to George than normal because the tire deg was less. But it's all a relative thing, isn't it? And the bottom line is, Kimi was able to do that for a long time. And he was doing it partly because of the ambience, but partly because of the way he was using the tire and the way he was spreading the energy load over the complete tread of the tire, or the contact patch of the tire is the right word, rather than an edgy thing, and that's to do with how much heat goes into the rate at which the heat goes into the tread anyway, which is a factor of how the tires degrade. So that's what showed up more for me in Canada than anything else, is how good Kimi is at having a flat car, if you like, just flat to the road, which is a phrase Rob Wilson often uses to describe when you're braking. Always try to brake with the car flat, with all four wheels square to the road. And even if you're having to change, having to brake when you've got lateral load on the car, try to create just a little bit of flat car, as Kimi was doing beautifully between 1 and 2 in Canada for your braking into there. And that's why he was all over George in that section of road as well, because he was creating whatever he was doing coming out of 1. He was always creating this little area where just get the car flat and then into 2, braked and into 2. Beautiful. Max too. Max was outstanding there, I thought. Whereas Lewis was more slightly longer corners, very fluid, very good, but and everything was working for him tire-wise. And just going back to the Charles thing, if it is tire temperature for sure, it's tire temperature related, and if it is that, my advice to Charles would be, do not go down the road of trying to understand that. Block it off, get on with Monaco, and that's, you don't need a sports psychologist to tell you that. But when you look at golfers, for example, which is it's an interesting sport because it's a 4-day event, and if they've had a bad round, say round 2, they will never ever dwell on it. They'll only think about the next round, round 3, and sometimes you can shoot a 74 on round 2 and a 62 on the next round. Not me, but they, and it often happens overnight, just like that. And that's what Charles needs to do. He needs to have that approach. I don't care. Canada's dead and buried. Monaco now, bring it on. And he should be feeling confident about Monaco and looking forward to it. That's the other thing. He should be. That's if anybody around him, that's what they should be telling him to do. Oscar's another matter, and we need to talk more about Oscar, I think, because I'm still, in my mind, amazed that Oscar's driving so badly at the moment and not taking advantage of all these things that are going on around him. And, when George Russell doesn't score and your teammate has transmission issue in the end, I think it was, that stopped him, Oscar Piastri should have been the guy up there in second place in Canada, reaping the rewards of that. Maybe even taking the race to Kimi. I don't know. I mean, I think the McLaren was that good, actually. Instead of which, he started on the wrong tyres and got mired into nonsense, and that was it. Terrible. You know, how can that happen to a guy like Oscar Piastri with all that experience that he has now in a car that good? And I keep saying it, you know, second row of the grid, just a millisecond behind Lando. But he should have been quicker than Lando. That's the other point, you know, and he needs to be concerned about that. Zabish continues, do you think it's safe to say that in raw speed Kimi is faster than George now, and in Monaco will that translate to him once again dominating George? I don't think around Spa I think George would be quicker around Spa. I think he'd be quicker around, where else, I don't know. I mean, all those new circuits with long straights and chicanes and DRS areas, George won't be slow on any of those. Silverstone would be an interesting comparison through Silverstone, because there are quite a lot of, I'm not saying Kimi's not good on fast corners, but George is really good on fast corners. So, but yeah, in general, overall, who's the quicker driver, Kimi Antonelli or George Russell right now? I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but I suppose you'd have to come down on the side of Kimi, wouldn't you? So Monaco, I can't see anywhere really where George is going to be quicker than Kimi around Monaco. Maybe the entrance to back. Maybe. That's about it. Maybe into Casino Square. I don't know. Maybe. There are only two areas. And being super quick into Casino Square isn't necessarily going to give you the pole, because even if you are super quick into Casino Square, it doesn't, the reward is just a tiny reward at the top of the hill. There's nothing afterwards to reward you. To back a little bit, maybe. But no, Kimi will be good at Monaco. Obviously, Monaco, there are so many variables that come into play, traffic and all the rest of it. And Kimi also has to be very careful at Monaco to keep the thing on the island with all the momentum and all the fuss that will be there around him. And I guess he's got a very good support group now that try to keep him isolated from all of that. But the last thing Kimi needs to do is, you know, hit the guardrail or something 20 minutes into FP1 at Monaco. You know, he needs to have a very, very clean build up to qualifying, get the pole, obviously. And once he's done that, then relatively speaking, it's downhill, isn't it? All things being considered equal with the weather. But having said the weather, what did happen about this rain, this famous rain in Canada? Non-existent. A few spots on the camera lenses, and that was about it. Apart from the odd wet curb, which presumably scared Lando and Oscar into staying on intermediates on the outlaps. And I need a wet race. I don't know about you guys. I need a fix. I want a wet race. What's happening to all the wet races? Monaco. Wouldn't it be great if Monaco was wet? That'd be good. Zavez continues, will results like Canada help Lewis get back in that mental stage he was pre-21? And why was the clerk moaning like that on the radio when told that Lewis was faster? Immature. Yeah, well, I think moaning when you hear your teammates faster is probably quite natural, isn't it? Maybe you shouldn't moan. It bears out my thought that we shouldn't really have these radios, really. Do we need to hear all that? You know, you shouldn't be a racing driver if you're not unbelievably upset if you're slower than your teammate. That should kill you. You know, even if it's a millisecond, it should really annoy you. Otherwise, you shouldn't be in a race car. First point. Second point, I think it will help. Obviously, I mean, Lewis has been, I think, gaining confidence slowly over the last month or so. He's getting a little bit more feel for rhythm, and he would have really enjoyed that battle with Max and winning the battle with Max. Yeah, it'll help him mentally. Whether or not having that mental confidence now will manifest itself in beating Charles Leclerc around Monaco, if Charles has good tire temperatures and feels the surface of the road in the way he normally does, is another matter. I mean, it's what confidence is. That's why I'm always slightly dubious about sports psychologists in motor racing, because it's not about confidence or tranquility or, you know, mind control. It's about thinking like a racing driver, like Max Verstappen, and it's thinking about opportunities and thinking laterally. It's not about, you know, don't worry, be happy. It's all about being sharp, actually. And it seems to me that's where Oscar Piastri is suffering at the moment. He's not being sharp and taking advantage of little holes that are appearing. He's just sort of, nice and calm, tranquil. Let's get on with it. Yeah. And look what's happening, disappearing. This is from Ronnie Way. Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for your sharing. What are your views on reports that some teams are holding out on de-electrifying a bit more for 27? Apparently, Merck and Red Bull are for it. Well, who would that be? Ferrari in that case. I don't know much about it. I don't know much about those reports. I don't know anything about those reports, to be honest. So I can't really comment. But if you're saying Merck and Red Bull want to go for de-electrification or less electric, then the implication there is that Ferrari don't. And if they don't, it's because of the new Ferrari Luce road car. We are going electric. Good luck with that. So, yeah, I think, of course, I think any racing, I can't imagine any race team would want to have the same balance that we have now, or go back to where we were at the beginning of 2026. I can't imagine that anybody out there wouldn't want to be back where we were in 2025, or even more ice orientated. So I don't know what else to say there, really. I hope they go back to, I don't know, 70-30, 70 normally, internal combustion. Ronnie says, can the FIA push through even though other manufacturers are not on board yet? Politics and vested interests at play. You have to say Merck is likely to walk away with 2 trophies. Well, there's a lot of vested interest. I think ultimately it's going to be Liberty, isn't it? Liberty, because money rules everything these days, and because even though they only own the commercial rights, and because they were therefore still able to be instrumental in the way the 2026 regs were drawn up, anything could still happen. So I think they realized that they went too far and mistakes have been made. So probably we will go back to less electric in 27. That's the way I'm assuming it's going to be, but not by much. Same from Zabez. Around turn 1 and turn 2 in Canada, I think George had to leave him space. He was alongside at the turn in, and George even used more throttle mid-corner to make sure Kimi is pushed wide. What do you think? Well, the descriptions I was making about the two of them in that section of road apply to when they were relatively on their own, not alongside one another. When you're racing wheel to wheel, side by side, obviously then it's a different deal, and you do what you can to make sure you don't get past, or if you're in the other car, you do what you can to get past. But I would repeat what I said, which is that I think for Kimi, that turn 1 pass was always going to be very, very difficult for him to pull off. And I don't think it was the right thing for him to have done, because it was too easy for the two cars to hit one another there going into 2. If he's around the outside of George, inevitably George is going to come across. He's not going to just stay wide. And so I don't think that was the right pass for Kimi to make. But having said that, I don't think he made the pass with a lot of thought. I think it was just an instinctive reaction based on, I can't believe what George is doing here. There's lots of road on the outside. What's wrong with him? I'm just going around here. I'll see what happens. And I think it was more that than it was just pure reflex instinct that enabled him to do that. Because, I mean, what happened at the first corner anyway after the start? What was George doing? How much earlier did he brake into turn 1 compared with Kimi? What was that all about? I presume he was just completely befuddled by Lando coming down the inside and just got into a risk avoidance mode. Got to bring the car home at all costs. Just hit the brakes. Kimi just goes like that. That was very odd. Very odd. Luke Mifsud. Hi, Peter. Do you think this V8 2031, my mind still boggles at how far we have to think these days, is realistic? Talk is realistic, or are they going to? Are they doing it to distract from current regs? On another note, could they compromise enough to keep teams like Audi in the sport? I think it's realistic, but the talk is what? It's from the FIA president, who's just but one of the players in this. And there are probably at least another. Well, if you include all the teams, there's a lot of players there, and then there's all the Liberty crowd. So it's one person, the president, putting his stake in the ground, saying, "I think we should go back to something like V8s." I don't think that'll happen, to be honest. I'd love to see it happen, but I just can't see it happen. Could they compromise enough to keep teams like Audi in the sport? Well, I don't know. I don't know whether we want to keep teams like Audi. I'm not saying Audi specifically, but how much do we need to be beholden to the car companies in order to have a Formula One that's successful and watchable and grows every year? I don't think we need to be that beholden. I think that the fans are just as interested in watching Red Bull v McLaren as they are or could be between Mercedes versus Audi. And so I think there's a lot of hot air being talked about car companies. And if I was in some sort of position, decision making position, I wouldn't make the car companies any more important or less than the race teams in terms of what the sport needs and what Formula One needs. But that's only me. I mean, obviously, people that are worried about their bottom line all the time, i.e., Liberty, and want to make as much money as possible, think, I presume, that the car companies have more ready money to spend than most other groups out there in Formula One, and therefore they need to look after them. So, yeah, in answer to your question, if Audi said tomorrow, if you guys go any further down the road of non-electrification, you take any more electrification out of the car, we're out of the sport. I'm sure that Liberty would listen to that and make that part of their decision-making process. Equally, Morizo of Toyota may say, look, I'm fed up with all this electric stuff. We'll come into Formula One, but we only want to come in if it's normally aspirated engines, turbo, 1100 horsepower. I want it to be the Formula One equivalent of a GR Yaris Rally 1 car. Would that be brilliant? Then what would Liberty do? Well, Audi here, Toyota there. That's why I say, you can't go around trying to please the car companies because all of them have slightly different agendas. And it's changing. It's rapidly changing now, the whole EV thing. I mean, think about that Ferrari. And Ferrari can be seen, I suppose, in wherever, Beverly Hills, driving the thing at 30 miles an hour. You pull up by your coffee shop and you say, wow, it's got active ride, it's got four-wheel steering, 4 electric engines, does 700 miles an hour, whatever they want to say. But the reality is the thing weighs 2,200 kilos. It's doing a lot of damage to the road, to the tires. So all this business of, electric, do they take that into account? How damaging a heavy car is on roads if everybody drove around in cars that heavy, for a start. And secondly, what is the point of all that? There is no point to it. Ridiculous money for cars that aren't really ever going to be driven very quickly anyway. And they've got active ride on it. As far as I know, Active Ride's greatest thing, apart from being simple and light, obviously, but hasn't done much to help the weight saving on the Ferrari, is basically to give you a very stable chassis platform under which you've got your diffuser operating perfectly with the floor, with the road as the floor. And is the Ferrari Luce ever going to be going that quickly to benefit from that? I think not. So there you go. Here's Savage saying the new Ferrari looks like an ugly box. They had to do it for EU regulations or pay a hefty fine. It's just pathetic, isn't it? Absolutely pathetic. But they didn't have to design it that way and make it look that way, did they? They didn't have to get 2 Apple blokes to come in and, on the basis that they designed an Apple Watch, they're now going to design the coachwork for a Ferrari. What is that all about? I suppose you could say, well, it's the new era, the new world. Goodbye aerodynamics, goodbye streamlining. It's all about functionality or whatever they want to say. Well, sorry, I love Ferraris, and to me, a company and a car company that can build a 330 P4 or a Dino 206 prototype as raced by Lorenzo Bandini, Nürburgring, 1,000 kilometers, should not be allowed to build a car that looks like, where are we? This. I mean, it's just, what would Sergio Pininfarina say about that? I mean, it's just nonsense, isn't it? What has gone wrong with the world? Anyway, actually now is an appropriate moment, I think. I did mention in the description that I've done an interview with the co-author of a book that means a lot to me. So indulge me, please. And I think you'll see why I'm asking to be indulged, because this is a story about an amazing human being, let alone an amazing racing driver. And this is a very short cut. It's a 7-minute cut of a 30-minute interview, which I'll put out later in its full form, fullest extent, tonight, probably. And I ask you to watch it and buy the book. I mean, it is just, not much has ever been said about this driver. And the driver is Alan Stacey, a young Englishman who, long before he became a racing driver, at the age of 17, was riding his BSA motorcycle gently along a Essex road in England on a summer's day, pulled up to a junction and pulled out, and a grocery van, just suddenly came from the right and hit him and very badly damaged his right leg. Not his fault at all. And because he was allergic to penicillin, when some gangrene set in a day or two later at the hospital, they chopped off his leg, just below the knee, right leg. And very shortly afterwards, he was out and he was driving the old farm. He built this sort of go-kart type thing, this big car around the farm. He started driving that again using his walking stick for the throttle, and then got his first tin leg. They were tin legs in those days. And he started going motor racing. He got a £4,000 payoff from the grocery company for the accident. And that was enough to buy an old truck, for an old van for a transporter, and to buy a Lotus 6 with which to go racing. And he had a hand throttle fitted to the gear shift, brake with his left foot for the rest of his life, obviously, and was brilliantly quick, adapted immediately, to the point where Colin Chapman eventually offered him a Lotus Formula One drive. And he was brilliant. He was really quick. But then his career was cut short with a terrible accident at Spa, which killed him. Anyway, his family, his nephew, who's also called Alan Stacey, has co-written this book, and it's a wonderful book. So here's the chat with Alan Stacey. As I say, it's 7 minutes, so please watch it. Alan, great to meet you, albeit online. Great privilege to meet you, actually, and that you even carry the same name as your uncle is amazing. And I don't know where to start, really, because this wonderful book, Alan Stacey's Life and Lotus Career, is obviously self-explanatory, but it goes into so much detail about his life away from racing even. It's very unusual, I think, for a driver from that era to be given and to have had so much scope around his personality and what he was all about. And so, first of all, I just want to say congratulations on the book. And I guess you and the family are pretty happy with the way it's come out.
Oh, super happy. Yes. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for all your support as well and guidance. The real winner is seeing my parents and uncle and aunt just bowled over by the result of BHP publishing. It's just been fantastic. That's as rewarding as anything, really.
I think it's very nice in the book, and it comes through in the introduction as well, how not too much time is spent and dwelt on the injury and losing his lower right leg at the age of 17, I think.
Yes.
And it just sort of carries on from there. And then he raced this and did that. There is a very good picture at one point, I think it's in the 11, of the hand throttle that he used on the gear shift. But of
Yes.
course, that opens up a massive number of questions. One is that I guess he did all his braking with the left foot, so he was probably the original left foot braker. And secondly, presumably only had one hand on the wheel at any given moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, David Piper tried his style or his conversion and had a terrible time with it. So incredible adaptation. And there's a lovely picture in the book from the Le Mans car. So
Yeah.
on top of that, he's actually sharing a car with someone who had two working legs. So I can only take my hat off to him, how he adapted and never complained and just got on with it. In fact, many people didn't even know he had a false leg.
You know, we talked about possible causes. We'll never know, I think, exactly what happened, but the general theory is that he was hit by a bird. I mean, the interesting thing I've always thought was that Jim Clark was hit by a bird in the face in practice for the 66 French Grand Prix at Reims. And 2 weeks later, he didn't race that weekend and went back to England. But 2 weeks later, he was racing at Brands Hatch in the British Grand Prix. And, I wonder, and he's not the only driver car ever to hit a bird. But I mean, if it was something like a low-flying pheasant straight in the face, it would have been catastrophic, that's for sure.
Yeah, very exposed in a Lotus 18 and a very exposed track. But I always felt through my research, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but I always felt that was a rather convenient reason for the accident. Convenient for lots of reasons and lots of people. And as you say, we'll never know, and it doesn't make any difference. But Kevin did do a good job of tracking down alternative theories from contemporary reports.
Yes, he did, and I think we should also. I mean, it's whether it colours one's judgment of what happened or assessment of what happened with Alan or not, I don't know, but it's certainly significant that on the same weekend, Michael Taylor had a huge crash due to a steering failure on the Lotus 18, and Sterling Moss, of course, had his huge accident with a rear hub failure on the Lotus 18. And I think that always, adds that air of mystery to what then happened to Alan, also in a Lotus 18.
Yeah, and they were a super fragile car. I mean, cars were fragile then, but the 18 was famously fragile and still a prototype in many respects. So, yeah, you're right. We never know. We'll never know. It doesn't make any difference as the family. It doesn't change history. I was keen in the book with Kevin to get that over, that it wasn't, there wasn't a scientific analysis of the accident. No. The theory that's put around by the bird strike may well be true. It may not be true. It doesn't make any difference, but I don't know if it's gospel. I'm not convinced it's gospel. There used to be an interview with Linus Ireland on YouTube. It's gone now. And he lists the failures of the 18 during Spa. And when they inspected the hubs on all of the cars after Moss's accident, almost all the hubs had failed, or were just about to fail. And they've also found a failure on Alan's steering column, which ties back to Taylor's accident as well. So they were super fragile cars in a very high speed race track. And there was no margin.
And Kevin raises a few questions about the fire as well, and what caused the fire, and how, and then in the context of Innes very sadly reporting in the book, that Alan's overalls looked okay and he looked okay. There's some very strange things there that don't really add up.
No. And Innes was clearly absolutely devastated by losing his friend. And Kevin makes a point. Was it there to protect and sugarcoat the story for the family? Well, you could understand if he did do that. It's a far better story to tell the family.
Yeah.
And there's a lovely section of a letter that took 20 odd years for Innes to write to Prim, talking about the day. So we'll never know. No one will ever know. But we were talking about a very, very fragile.
We will, Alan, and I think. And I think also your family handled it so well. They come over as being so stoic in the book, in the face of that accident and tragedy. Again, part of that, I guess, is a little bit of the essence of the 1950s and how you dealt with tragedy. But part of it, I'm sure, is the backbone of your family.
I think so, and that's led from the matriarch and patriarch of the top of the family, and Innes and Sir John Whitmore and everyone commented on how my grandmother was during the funeral and subsequent days, looking after people, not wanting to see people cry. Alan wouldn't have wanted to see you cry, I think she said to Innes. And then my aunt saying, it was a stiff upper lip in those days.
Wow, it's very difficult to talk about it without getting very sad about it, but equally great to be able to talk about it today with you and to relive his life and his career, which I'm sure many fans really aren't even aware of, let alone forgotten. And this book, I'm sure, will bring a lot of that to life in a way that certainly Alan, your namesake, would be very happy about, and I suspect you are too, and you and the family are. Yeah, that's right. Beautiful book. And the number of photographs in there, I think that's why it's captured my imagination so much, because it's very rare that a book is written about a driver from a past era in which a massive number of photographs suddenly appear, never published before, from the albums of that family and the driver. So just worth getting for the pictures, if nothing else, but a great story too. And what a star. Not the only racing driver that's had to go through such handicaps, obviously, but the way he adapted at a time when the technology in Formula One was not particularly advanced was stunning, absolutely captivating. Right, Luke Mifsud. As an F1 fan, listening to team radios like Hamilton asking for more power, it's off-putting, as if they can provide it on demand. Since when do drivers ask for more engine power? Current regs are absurd. Yeah, I thought the same thing, actually. It was very sad. It was, no, give me more power. I need more power, mate. That's not, as you say, that is not motor racing. And in theory, there's always power there. It's up to the driver to harness the power and manage the power. So that's not a great thing. The only thing I would say there is that possibly it was something that Ferrari were wanting Lewis to say in the build up to any slight mods that may be made, or changes that might be made to the engine regulations in 26. Ferrari don't have enough power. We better give them a bit more power. Maybe it's a little bit of that, but we'll give Lewis the benefit of the doubt, I think, and say that's what it was. He was just giving Ferrari a bit of a hand there. Billadelli. Hi, Peter. That's a nice name, Billadelli. Peter, knowing that Kimi is so much better than George in low speed corners, well, not so much better. I mean, poor old George, give him credit. He was on the pole. He did win the sprint, 2 poles. But Kimi's better, though. Yeah, absolutely. He is better. And that adds up over a 5-lap period, 10-lap period, certainly over a race period. But yeah, he is, but not so much better. And with the confidence he's built so far, how do you see it going at Monaco between the Mercs? I see, if Kimi manages to get through Friday unscathed, which is a big ask for somebody in his position and the amount of attention he's going to be getting. This is Monaco, after all, the showpiece race of the year, the marquee race. And he is the guy that everybody's going to be around. All the cameras, all the media, the whole lot are going to be around Kimi Antonelli. So you have to say, if he survives Friday without hitting the wall and losing too much track time, he'll be in very good shape. But he needs to see Fridays. The track's not that quick anyway. Just, go around, see what it's all about, set the car up a little bit, and then see where we're at. And I think, has he driven at Monaco before? I suppose he has. I don't know. Did it have an F2 race when he was in F2? Don't know. Anyway, it's by the by. Even if he hasn't, it shouldn't take him too long to learn it. And then, come Saturday, it's a different deal, isn't it? When they get into the car Saturday morning and they're doing their race setup, and then they do a fuel run, and then it's all going to be about traffic and getting him out at the right time, making sure that he gets in a decent lap, probably be a banker lap that'll get him, be the faster of the 2 laps, inevitably at Monaco, and see how it goes. But yeah, I mean, all things being equal, he should beat George around Monaco. Zavage says, Merc has a better ICE engine than the rest. Other cars don't want to redesign their chassis and fuel tank to save money. Some even want to shorten races. Shameful display. It is pretty shameful when you think about how all those other teams were banged on and on about the cost cut, and we got to have this, and that's the only way to make racing equitable. Give us the budget cap, the cost cap, and we'll be right there. Everyone will be on the same page. Well, now they're moaning about something else and don't want to do this, and they've damaged too many cars anyway. Yeah, you're right. It is all shameful, and everybody should be acting in the best interest of the sport, which is bringing back more power to the ICE engine and less for the electric engine, and taking away a lot of the gizmos from the car. And we could even follow Peter Windsor's suggestion of getting rid of radios in the race and letting the drivers get back to brass tacks and just be racing drivers again. While we're about it, for 30, I suppose, it's because it take a long time to adjust. Why don't we go back to manual gearboxes and clutches as well? I think Max would love that. And I think it's not a question of whether you like Max or you don't like Max or what his personality's like, but on the basis that he is the best racing driver on the planet Earth, people should listen to him, whether they like him or not. If Max Verstappen says, yeah, it'd be good for racing drivers if we went back to manual shifts, I would love it, then everybody should think seriously, well, maybe that's what we should do. And of course, there'll be lots of drivers that are saying, oh, we can't do that, can't do this. But if one guy who happens to be that good says, yeah, no, this can work, then we should listen to it. Hi, Peter. I just watched a documentary. This is River JRIV, on the tragic murders of Mickey Thompson and his wife. How well known was Mickey in the motorsports community, and had you heard of Mike Goodwin before he was arrested? I hadn't heard of Mike Goodwin because he was his business partner and kept very much in the background. But of course, Mickey Thompson was very well known at the certainly in the early 60s as from a land speed record breaking thing. He and Craig Breedlove were just like household names when I grew up in Australia anyway. You know, Mickey Thompson, Craig Breedlove, on the back of Donald Campbell, and that was how I first heard of him. And then, to my shame, the next time I'd heard of him was in Indy 64 when obviously Dave McDonald had the big shunt and he was in Mickey's car. But I didn't know until I listened to that podcast that I mentioned that one of the reasons that that car was so unstable in 64 was because they'd changed the wheel sizes. And you would imagine a car company or a manufacturer like Mickey would accommodate that, but the car was inherently unstable on the bigger wheels. But that's no excuse, really, is it? And I have to say, just as an adjunct here, I never realized until I started reading about him how good Dave McDonald was as well. I just, all these names of these terrible tragedies used to appear in the press, and a bit like, was it Dave White? Ed White, I think it was Ed White, the astronaut who was killed, with Gus Grissom when the thing failed to take off, and that was he was just another name, but Dave McDonald was unbelievably quick, amazing car control, and when you look at video of him driving the Scarab sports car, how good he was. And cool, an interesting, cool guy too, because he always had the open face helmet with this. It was one of the more modern ones, but he put the goggles on first, so the helmet was outside the goggle straps. I think Craig Breedlove started that trend, actually, if I think about it. Anyway, yeah, 64. But then I read about it. Mickey Thompson was an innovator, and he just wanted to do things his way, and he was a very hard worker. 17 hours a day guy, and his wife was there helping him as well. And yes, he did very well with his sports after race business of in car performance upgrades and accessories. That did very well for him, but he always just wanted to build great race cars. And yeah, very sad. This guy Mike Goodwin, obviously, there was a big drama and behind the scenes with their business relationship, and yeah, I think he was on a bike or something, wasn't he? He went out and killed them. Terrible, absolutely terrible. Ronnie, do you think Monaco will level up other teams, even if Mercedes' downforce is superior, such as Red Bull? Max has done well there. Ditto his pole 2 years back. Yeah, I do. I think Max has got more chance to be near a Mercedes and a Ferrari and a McLaren at Monaco than somewhere like Miami. So yeah, I do. And I think he can do more in the car around there. And I presume there'll be not much harvesting required, so we're not going to be in that mode of having to worry too much about super clipping or all that stuff, and they will be able to drive the cars. That's what I'm assuming, that they've got it about right for Monaco. I may be wrong, but I agree with you. I think that's the way it could go. River again. Peter, what do you think of Piastri this year? Don't think it's been talked about how much he's struggling, given the way he was spoken about as world champion waiting last year. Well, yeah, and you're absolutely right, and that's why I have been talking about it, because everybody seems to be forgetting the whole Oscar Piastri thing and how badly he's driving. Mark Webber no longer seems to be going to races, and he's managing Oscar still, but the sort of on-track stuff, which I think is a mistake, because I can't imagine Webber in Canada would have allowed Oscar to go out on intermediates. I really can't. Because Webber had been driving with that team, I can tell you now he would have been on slicks. Absolutely no question about it. But I suspect this is something that's coming from Stella. They just want the drivers to be part of the team, and they don't want some well-known individual there maybe causing an imbalance in the garage because Webber's favouring Piastri or something. I don't know what it is, but he's got his engineer from Prema, I think, with him now, hasn't he? But again, if you're going to go to that trouble and get a guy from Prema to be part of your team, the one thing you'd want from him is somebody to prevent you going out on intermediates on a dry track. And that didn't happen. And he's not actually getting the best from himself, in my opinion. And the car is obviously very good now. It's a very good car. Again, I mean, the upgrades have worked well, but Oscar should be upstaging Lando. He should be a tenth or two ahead of Lando every race, and he should be ahead of him on the racetrack. You know, Lando's won his championship. He's in a little bit of a, I don't really care what happens. I'm so happy. I love life. I'm driving for a great team. If the car's good, things go my way, I'm going to win Grand Prix. If they don't, I'm still going to enjoy it. But Oscar's not in that mode, is he? He's still can't get over. I didn't win the championship last year. I've got to win it this year. I've got to beat Lando. You know, everything. He's a racing driver, and yet you don't get that impression when you watch him in the car. It's all sort of fairly laconic. You know, yeah, calm, even, cool, glad, happy, campfire, clapping. Which is, I keep saying that because that's the impression you get from McLaren. It's just a very glad, happy team, and there's no raw edge to it. And it really upsets me because I think Oscar's a very, very fast racing driver, and we're not seeing it. I don't know, he's got too many people around him, probably. He's got Stella's thing. He's got, you know, telemetry, probably looking at too much telemetry from Lando again. Just feel the car and drive the car the way you want to drive it, as you did at Suzuka. And it's a similar advice for Charles Leclerc. Different people, different issues going on, but similar cure, I think, to the problem. Get rid of all these people. You don't need a sports psychologist. You don't need more engineers. You don't need, but I mean, one thing you might need is somebody like Mark Webber saying, "Slicks, mate." You know, that wouldn't have hurt at all to have had Webber in your ear in Canada saying, "Slicks, mate. Yeah, what are you doing?" And but they don't do that. He's not doing that. So what can I say? Savage again. Will you be doing members live streams every year? Will you be doing members race live streams every time, Peter? That's the plan, Zabez. Yeah, that's the plan. Assuming you guys are not going to try and throw proverbial oranges at me, metaphorical digital oranges at me and lemons and things, and you're enjoying it. Yeah, I'm up for it, definitely. And you know, we'll try and improve it as well. As a matter of interest, I was talking to Liberty, more specifically F1, about these watch-alongs, and because I noticed quite a lot of channels out there now are using data, putting data up on the screen from the apps you can use for telemetry, for timing and everything else, the circuit map. And I was talking to them about it, and they said, no, it's all completely illegal, and they're going to try and get on top of it. So if anybody's wondering why I don't do that, it's because, and I'm not going to get involved with other people's business, but in my case, I've always had a good relationship with F1. I like to protect that relationship, and that's why I don't do it, because I know they think it's not appropriate to be using that stuff for that. So it's just going to be me, but if that's okay with you, that's okay with me. You know, I'm happy to do it, and it's a good fun thing to do. And for those that haven't seen it, for members, I do this. I do a live chat during the race, and actually the last weekend was a bit chaotic, apart from the fact it was a chaotic race. Also, we had Indy going on, and we had lots of euphoria from that and various other bits and bobs. So it was all quite busy, but yeah, looking forward to Monaco and doing that one. Ronnie says, Peter, there's Lando too, and he's still in contention as the McLaren is, as you said, a very good downforce car, but it seems the team decides most things for the drivers. Well, I think they do, you know, and I suspect it was the team that decided that pushed Oscar into not having Webber at races, which shows that the drivers are too much controlled by the team, in my opinion, which brings me back to my point. You know, they should be the ones that make the decision about tires when it's slicks or intermediates. And they're the ones that are driving the car. Turn off the radios. That's for the benefit of the drivers that I'm suggesting that. And we make the car a much more simple car to operate in race conditions. And that's not happening, is it? Zavej Duggal. 24 was the best ground effect year, in my opinion. 7 different race winners, super close racing, and no one knew who would win. Then 25, the dirty air ruined it all. Yeah, well, 25, of course, by then they'd put so many little strakes and all different deflectors everywhere to get the car to work, to stop bouncing, that they were generating much more turbulence. And as you say, the dirty air ruined it all. The problem with 24 or from 22 to 24 was just getting rid of the bouncing in the cars. And some teams did it very well from day one. Others did not. I mean, obviously Red Bull pretty much hit the ground running, but that 22 Merc was probably one of the worst Grand Prix cars of recent times, that's for sure. Luke says, in my opinion, if McLaren is on par with Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull to challenge for the title, they do not have the drivers to win a championship. Lando and Oscar are not on par with other lineups. Well, it's sad to hear that because you're actually talking about the world champion. So what we're basically saying is there's something wrong with the system then. If we're producing a world champion who isn't actually on a par with the other lineups, then what is going on? And I think, I have to say, I think you're probably right. You know, both of them, for both of them to concede that they can start that race on intermediates was just beyond me. And that's just lack of confidence in your own ability, concern about what your teammates doing and making sure that you don't do anything wrong, as distinct from going for what might be right, and being too dominated by the team and not being racing drivers and feeling the car and just getting out there and going for it. And that's an issue. And it comes back. I got to repeat it because I believe it firmly in the case of Oscar that had he stayed at Alpine and they declared him as the race driver that year and blown Ocon away, he might well be in a Mercedes now or a Ferrari. I don't think he would have been in anything less than that because everybody wanted Oscar Piastri at that stage. Obviously, McLaren did too. And I tell you something else. If Daniel Ricciardo had been in that McLaren in Canada alongside Lando Norris, I don't believe there's any way in the world he would have started that race on intermediates. Daniel would have said, nah, slicks, mate, forget it. And probably would have won the race, if not finished second. And this is the guy they just fired for Oscar Piastri. Now, I'm not saying Oscar's not better than Daniel. He is quicker than Daniel, in my opinion. He's a faster driver than Daniel Ricciardo. So if that's what they wanted, then they got it. But I don't think that's what they needed in that other car if you had Lando Norris. I think they could have won the championship last year in a much more, in a much calmer way had they run Norris Ricciardo. And I think Daniel would be doing very well in races like Canada even now. And yet he's sitting on the sidelines, and that's wrong. It's wrong for Formula One. It's a waste for Formula One because the guy's a talented bloke and a very nice guy too. And it's, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Anyway, any more questions I need to get to? Here we go. Ronnie says, I think they should appoint one or two drivers to the FIA committee when deciding on changes to regulations, engines, electrification. Drivers have spoken up before, but not acted on. I agree. You know, the drivers have lost a lot of power because they're so dominated by the teams. If you think about Jackie Stewart and how he took the GPDA to a new level, to the point where they boycotted races if they weren't happy with the safety and the guardrail installations and other things, and where the GPDA are today and the influence the drivers have or don't have on the regulations that are coming up. I think it's very wrong how it's gone that way. And it's all dominated by the teams because they control the money. And that's the problem. And because a point I made earlier, that because a lot of drivers earn a lot of money, it's too easy for them to shrug it off and say, oh, well, you know, I did my best and that's it. And they don't fight for it. And that's what's changed. With the exception of one driver, I think I would still say Max Verstappen is the guy that would stand up for something if he was able to do it and had the opportunity. And I hope going into these new regs that Max Verstappen is given a position to talk and to be respected and to have his opinion listened to. Very important. Okay, I'd just like to say thank you to Zabej again. Welcome to level 1. That's very kind. And I'm just going to check my chat box now, make sure nothing's frozen. 1 second. Yes, another question from Zabej says, if all drivers boycotted a race, the regs would change in a day. Well, that's right, you know, and that's maybe what we need because at the moment it's not good. And we've got too many parts of the regulations that could have been avoided. And we do know that at least 2 years ago, several of the teams, I don't know whether it was the drivers within the teams or the teams, did voice an opinion that this was going to kill some of the great corners of Formula One and the way some of the great drivers go into some of the great corners in Formula One, and they were not listened to. And that's kind of where we're at and where it's gone wrong. Okie dokie. It's been a lot of fun. I've got a billion things I need to get on with. So thanks very much for joining us on this live stream. Big thanks to REC Watches, OEM Exclusive, to Jetcraft and to Track Ninja for their ongoing support of this channel. Brilliant to have them on board. And thank you for your questions and comments as ever. Without you, we wouldn't have a show. So thank you for that. We're doing another live stream next week, next Wednesday, on the build up to the Monaco Grand Prix. And I'll have Mark Slade alongside me there, and you can put your technical questions to Mark about the setup for Monaco and his thoughts going into that race post Canada and indeed going into Monaco. So yeah, looking forward to that as well. In the meantime, have a good weekend. Take care. See you soon.